Wasabi everybody, welcome back to another top 10 commander video, and this time I want to talk about something a little bit controversial, but I think you'll all understand where I'm coming from here. When I talk about each of these salty cards, I have the top 10 saltiest commander cards. Now before I get started, I would like to point out that most of you who are watching are not subscribed to the channel, so I would greatly appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button and the notification bell. I really appreciate your support, and we are moving past 20,000 now. So I know that EDHREC.com, they have their own little ranking percentage-wise which cards are the saltiest. I don't really think it's that accurate, because to me, it's a little bit more than just not liking a card. There has to be a justified reason for not liking it. It can't just be, oh, well, it's just too good. I think there has to be an actual justification for why it's too good. So it has to do something that no other card does, and it has to do it in a way that's actually pretty cheap, gets around something, it's not an inconvenience just to abuse it. That's really what I'm talking about here. So let's start it off here with number 10. I want to talk about Armageddon, or really just Armageddon cards. There are a lot of cards that destroy lands, so I guess you could consider this the number 10 slot for all of those cards, but Armageddon is the one that comes to mind because we're really just talking about destroying all lands. It's one of the saltiest things you can do, especially if you can pair it up with anything that will make your lands indestructible, like an Avacyn Angel of Hope, making it pretty much just a one-sided destroy all of your opponent's lands card. Only number 10 because, believe it or not, I think land destruction is so hated, like I think it's even more hated than Infect, to the point where most people just don't play it. It doesn't see really much competitive play at all, because it's one of the worst things that you can do in a game to make everybody's time less enjoyable. You pretty much make it so that nobody can come back. Let's say you had 7 lands. It's going to take a while before you get those back. So number 9, we have Rhystic Study, another one I think makes a lot of people salty, and it's not even because I think it's overpowered. It's just going to sit on the field and offer blue even more card draw, to the point where they have an excess, and it's in a color that doesn't need it. It's in a color that really doesn't need this much card draw. I mean, it is a very blue card, but by far the saltiest thing about it, it's not even the great card draw, because again, cards can be powerful, you have to explain why cards are salty. Rhystic Study is just the card that everyone knows because you're going to be asking them, hey, do you want to pay an extra mana or let me draw a card? That's really it. It's only number 9 because I think that's the only annoying part about it. It is actually pretty easy to pay a mana whenever you play a spell. You do have to slow down the game, which I think Rhystic Study accomplishes more than people believe. You're not going to go off and have a big turn if someone's just going to draw their whole deck and probably win. And then number 8 is Mana Drain. Mana Drain is the only counterspell that really does this. There's another one, it's Simic colored. It's not nearly as good because it's 4 mana, but for 2 mana here you get the same counterspell mana to counter a target spell. And that's it. It's exactly the same as the original card from the very beginning, but you get to add an amount of mana at the beginning of your next main phase equal to that card's converted mana cost. So if you counter a 7-costed spell, you will get 7 mana, which I think is just ridiculous to have on a counterspell. Like, you have a lot of advantages with different counterspells. I mean, they can't just all be the same, otherwise that would be boring. You have counterspells that let you scry, you have counterspells that let you exile those spells. This one, though, has probably the best upside, the best benefit to paying that 2 blue mana. And then number 7, we have Cyclonic Rift. This is one that I think everybody's going to complain about until the end of time, but in its defense, if we're going to play devil's advocate here, it is the only blue removal spell that is this good. It's not like it's an addition to a ton of blue spells that are just going to solve every problem. You only really have this one card when you're considering board wipes, when you're considering mass removal. This is really the only card that will make it easy for you to one-side return everything you don't control back to their owner's hands, every non-land permanent. So when thinking about it that way, it is a little bit more fair, but still, Cyclonic Rift, throw it into any deck that's playing blue, it's going to be the best card played in the game, probably. Because when you're playing it, you're just opening the field for whatever strategy you have. Let's say you need to deal a ton of combat damage, commander damage. Cyclonic Rift makes it very easy to do this, because you can just play it at the end step of your opponent's turn who's going before you, and then you have an empty field, you have nothing in your way. But of course, to slow down the game, to make it easier on yourself in any situation, it's still a great card. And then number 6 here we have Protean Hulk. Protean Hulk just exists to combo. And that's another problem I have with certain creatures. is that they just only really see play because they combo. Like, I've never seen Protean Hulk used because someone wants to get any number of creatures costed 6 or less total. It's usually because they know how to get to a 2-card combo, go infinite, and win. I mean, I guess that's fair for competitive play. You have a lot of 2-card combos, but it just seems like that's the only reason why Protean Hulk exists. I've never seen it played casually, and even if it did see play casually, people would still combo with it. And while I can understand it, I mean, this is a card everybody complains about. This is a card everybody brings up when they're talking about the most powerful competitive decks. I mean, even without Flash, it's still pretty easy to kill this off and get to your creatures. And then number 5, we have Consecrated Sphinx. Again, these are cards that are pretty much the only ones that do this. You have certain things where you have several spells like Armageddon, where that gets incredibly annoying. Consecrated Sphinx is the only card, kind of like with Rhystic Study, that does this specific thing, where you get more card draw if your opponents are drawing cards. It just sits on the field you draw to for every one card they draw. And I mean, Consecrated Sphinx is quite a unique card. I really don't think we have anything else like it, to the point that when you play it, you have to get rid of it quickly. If you don't get rid of it, then someone might just draw to whatever win con they have in their deck and then win, because that's how quickly the game will go. And I guess the reason why we call these salty cards is that they don't have any downside. Like, there's no downside to playing Consecrated Sphinx. This would be a bit more fair if there was a condition that you had to sacrifice it at the end of your following turn. That way you would have a full turn's worth of card draw, you would get a ton, and you would even be able to attack with it, but you wouldn't get to keep it out there. It would really just be there to slow down the game, keep people from their mass card draw. So in retrospect, I just think it's overpowered and slightly poor design. And then number 4, we have Nexus of Fate / really any extra turn spell that doesn't exile itself. But let's be honest, in any deck that is capable of taking extra turns, any deck that wants to take extra turns, I should say, you're going to play as many as you can. And it's kind of the same deal as with Armageddon and those cards. You have a ton of them. So the deck that is just filled with nothing but land destruction is going to see the most hate, and the deck that plays nothing but extra turn spells is going to see nothing but hate too. I think they're both pretty scummy, but extra turns I think is even more scummy, believe it or not, because not only are you pretty much preventing your opponents from playing any more Magic, but you're doing it in such a way where the entire spotlight is on you. It's like, what am I going to do next? Am I going to take another 20 minutes to have this turn and then another 20 minutes for my following turn? Oh look guys, I finally drew into an extra turn spell. I can keep these extra turn spells going. And I've never been a fan. If you've watched my channel for a long time, you know I'm not a fan of extra turn spells. So the next card we have here is Mindslaver. And this one is understandable. I don't even really think Mindslaver is to the point of hatred that I think extra turn spells are, because we don't have a ton of Mindslavers. Like, we have Mindslaver, and then we have some cards that allow you to take control of your opponent's turns, but they're not as easily abused. It's really just Mindslaver, because you can bring it back using a commander like Sharum the Hegemon. You can bring it back with really a ton of artifact recursion, and then just keep sacrificing it, keep taking control of your opponent's turns. Which, believe it or not, I know this might surprise you, is something that people really hate. They might hate it the most, having other people touch their cards, having other people play their turn for them. And then number 2, we have Winter Orb. I guess we could really just talk about Static Orb and Stasis in here, the same kind of category, because the decks that will take advantage of Winter Orb will also try to take advantage of those cards. But Winter Orb is the one that everybody recognizes. It's the one that you can abuse by tapping and untapping it. If you have a commander like Urza, you can do that. But again, it's sort of like the land destruction argument. However, the decks that can take advantage of Winter Orb, they can do it in a way where they're still allowed to use their mana. They can do it quickly, they can do it efficiently, and they can keep their opponents from ever untapping, or at least untapping in time to stop them. But this is right there with taking extra turns, land destruction, and taking control of your opponent's turns. It's one of the things that people hate the most in the game, and I think it might be one of the most hated things that you can do in Commander, is keep your opponent's lands tapped down. So before we go on to number 1, let's talk about some honorable mentions here. I love Jin-Gitaxias, but I don't really think Jin-Gitaxias is much of a problem. Not really relevant, I don't really see him in as many games anymore. We have some really good cards that might be a bit too expensive, like the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. It can be a pretty salty card if anyone's going to play it, but again, it is that big question mark, is anyone going to play it? And then we have a commander like Grand Arbiter Augustine, was probably a candidate earlier on in my channel's history. I'm not the biggest fan of Grand Arbiter. I think he's poorly designed, really just in it to ruin everyone else's game. But for that reason, he hasn't really seen that much play. And then we have Send Triplets, another very annoying commander. Less annoying, and I think a little bit more political, a little bit more fair, which is why I don't think it deserves to be on the list. So number 1 here is Hull Breacher. Hull Breacher is by far the newest card on this list, and it is already one of the saltiest cards here because it does something that is very similar to Winter Orb, very similar to Armageddon, all these cards that deny your opponents of their precious resources. This will keep them from drawing cards, pretty much. In combination with any kind of wheel effect, windfall effect, anything that can make everybody draw cards, this is going to stop them. It already stops them if they want to draw extra cards, period, but it'll pretty much empty their hand and give you nothing but treasure in return. That's what's so frustrating about this if you have to play against it, is that it's a good combination of a Narset Parter of Veils and Smothering Tithe. But it's even better than that because you get a flash creature, so you can do this in response to someone else's wheel, making it by far just one of the biggest nightmares to have to deal with. And for some reason, we're like, okay, Leovold is too much. Let's just start introducing more and more of these cards. I know it can't be your commander, thank God, but it's still one of the most frustrating things to have to deal with. So anyway, let me know what you think about these. It's just my opinion, of course. If you haven't already, subscribe, like, comment, share, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Void here signing off. Have a wonderful day.